writer! Have you taken your writing as far as you can on your own? Are you looking for a writing community to help you get it to that next level? Maybe a place where you can connect, get inspired, and make some real progress while writing, editing, and promoting your book. I'm super excited to announce my brand new Inner Circle, which is launching in July 2025. It delivers all the support that I normally reserve for my private one on one coaching clients, but it's in a small group format with other supportive writers to get you all the information you need to make your book the best it can be. It's just $199 a month, which is a fraction of the cost of my normal one on one coaching. Check out the details at suzievadori.com/inner circle. We're getting kickstarted early July, so grab your place now. Welcome to Show Don't Tell Writing with me, Suzie Vidori, where I teach you the tried and true secrets to writing fiction, nonfiction that are going to wow your readers, broken down step by step. We're going to explore writing techniques. I'm going to show you a glimpse behind the scenes of successful writers' careers that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. And I'm also going to coach writers live on their pages so that you can learn and transform your own storytelling. Whether you're just starting out, you're drafting your first book, you're editing, or you're currently rewriting that book, or maybe even your 10th book, this show's going to help you unlock the writing skills that you didn't even know you needed, but you definitely do. I'm so looking forward to helping you get your amazing ideas from your mind onto your pages in an exciting way for both you and your readers so that you can achieve your wildest writing dreams. And you're going to also have some fun doing it. Let's dive in. Today, we welcome Richie Billing to the show, and I just love the conversation that we were able to have because he has such a wide knowledge of the fantasy genre. So if you are curious about what it's like to write fantasy, what's going on in fantasy, all of that, he is the host of the popular podcast, The Fantasy Writers Toolshed, and he gets to talk to hundreds of writers about fantasy. So we do that today. We talk about what it is to write fantasy, how his process is when he builds a world, and then we talk a little bit about his books. He writes all kinds of stories, actually, not just books, from short story to novels to a recently released novella, but mostly in fantasy and literary fiction. His tales often explore real world issues, which is one of those cool things that you can do in fantasy. It's how you can address things that are happening in today's world. And Richie shares what kinds of things he shares or writes about in this episode, but with a fantasy twist so that we don't feel like we're reading a news report. He focuses on characters and their troubles. And so we kind of follow the characters through that journey and what becomes of them so you can play out different scenarios. His short fiction has been published by the Marquez Review and Gaslamp Pulpzine, among others, with one story adapted for BBC Radio. In March 2025, Richie released his fantasy novella, Together We Rise, that we talk about quite a bit in this podcast episode. It's a timely book about fighting corruption and injustice. Richie also hosts the podcast, The Fantasy Writers Toolshed, and links to all of that are in the show notes. Welcome, Richie. It is so great to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for inviting me on, Suzie. It's lovely to be here.
We wanted to do, when we were talking about planning this session, we wanted to talk about fantasy as a whole, because many of my listeners, they might write fantasy or they're not sure if they're writing fantasy or they're interested in writing fantasy. So what does fantasy mean to you, Richie? And not to put you on the spot, we can have a back and forth on it, but what is this so-called genre, this big umbrella of fantasy to you?
Yeah, it's definitely one that's garnered a lot of attention for decades, and more recently, it's become more mainstream. And I think for me, it's a world that's not different to ours. I mean, there's a spectrum there that you can include, but probably on the more extreme side of fantasy, you've got something that's completely different from where we are now. There might be dragons, there might be magic, and it's sort of, that spectrum goes all the way to sort of almost like Harry Potter level, where it's like a hidden world within our world. And I think that's one of the best things about it, is that it brings in bits of every genre. You can have romantic fantasy, the most popular genre.
Yes, which is what I write.
Yeah,
Romantic.
exactly.
Not romantasy. That's a different thing. We can talk about that too, but that's different. Keep going.
Yeah, but then you can have almost like crime stories, but in fantasy world. And you've got like the sort of epics, like Game of Thrones, and there's so much. It's so rich, and I think that what the reason why I love it is you can tell real world stories and cover real world issues, but you just got this complete freedom to tell it in any way that you want.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. It's really just a world that isn't. It could be magical realism. I think you were alluding to where it's in our world, but there's some magical elements, or a completely fantastical world, and which may or may not have magic. There are categories, if people can debate this. There are categories of fantasy where there is actually no magic, but you might not notice because the world is so cool that you just automatically assume that there's magic there. But I know I've got a few writer friends that write there in that space after writing in pure fantasy worlds. And then they're like, whoa, I'm missing my get out of jail free card, which is the magic. You write yourself into a corner. You can't just magic your way out of it, right? When you don't have magic in your world. But yeah,
I don't
it's
know.
really about that. And I think when I go to conferences and I speak to writers all over the world, and I ask why they read fantasy if I'm teaching something about magic systems or something. And I ask, why are you reading fantasy? Like, what is it about it? And I get that same answer all the time. It doesn't matter who the room is or if I'm teaching students, like kids, adults, doesn't matter. The answers are escape, entertainment, right? Like that they want to get away. But you're absolutely right. The lasting fantasy, the ones that do really well, often have real world events that they draw on are real world themes. And that's sort of what you were alluding to. And whether that's the world itself that's influenced by a culture, or whether you're mirroring something in a slightly safer environment so that it doesn't feel like we're in a, social studies lesson or something, or a history lesson, but we're
Yeah,
learning it in a new way.
definitely. Yeah, I think we get so like so much is thrown at us, consistently all this negative news, and it's hard for us to really engage with it after a while. We become desensitized, and to really like understand perspectives and the sort of nuances of different things. Sometimes you need to take a step back and put it in a story setting and create characters that people can relate to and show them what it is actually like, and to be from a different perspective that they might be opposed to. And stories, this is one of the best things about stories, isn't it? Is that it allows people to sort of look at something without the sort of biases that they've got in day-to-day life. They can sort of go at something with a more open mind, and that's how you, through culture and any sort of creative thing, you've got the ability to reach people who are otherwise closed off.
Yeah. I mean, is that what draws you to writing fantasy, is being able to explore that? Or is it something else that keeps you writing fantasy?
It for me is it's the escape, like being able to do something in cultivating that could be. But more recently, it has been more of a sort of way to tell a story that is like about our world, and our world has become more feel well, being more and more like a fantasy world, to be honest.
Yeah.
People are creating, don't know, but it's enabling me to sort of process things as a writer and as a person as well. And it's a, like I say, with Together We Rise, it was more sort of focused on me trying to deal with frustrations and helplessness, because we are sort of battered out with bad news. It's and the books are our relief.
I mean, we're so prevalent. And I mean, my feeds are full of a lot of it's AI generated now, it's just
Yeah.
regurgitating the same thing or changing it. But yes, it's so accessible. And I'm with you. Some of my favorite genres to read are historical fiction or, really
Mm.
tricky mystery, those types of things. But when I sit down to write, it's always fantasy. And there's a few reasons for that. You were talking about trying to process things or working through things, and writing is always personal. So if you're out there listening and you're writing a novel, I can guarantee you that if you hadn't taken a beat to think about it, there
Mm.
probably is something, some reason, some deeper reason that you're writing about, that you're trying to process at this particular novel at this particular moment in time. And there's no shame in that. That's what makes the magic, different from fantasy magic. But that's what makes your writing special and unique, and that can only come from you.
That's actually what's been going on in my head. And
Yeah, I mean, because I coach it, I'm actually hyper aware of it. It sometimes stops me from writing. So I'm like, whoa, that's on the page. And I feel like everybody's, especially when I first start writing, I felt like people were going to see themselves in my characters and understand what I was. But guess what? They don't. And 5 or 6 drafts in, you've morphed that idea so much that people aren't going to recognize the specific events, or they don't really know, is this something that Susie did? Or is it something she wished she did? Is it something she wished she did differently? Is it something she never did? Right? All of those things that you can only really write from your own perspective, in that whether it's something you would do or something you wouldn't do or something you want to do, it's all kind of colored by that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, human
I
minds.
think, yeah, I mean, like I said, I love reading historical fiction in particular, and working with historical writers. But for me, that research isn't a draw. So if I'm writing, I don't want to spend that time researching, because, like you said, we're inundated with news these days, and certainly contemporary news. And I just don't want that as part of my process. I want to make things up. That's part of the fun of being a fantasy writer. We get to make it up.
Yeah.
Are you thinking deeply about this? You're like, yeah, I guess I make things up. It's pure fiction, right? And I think you bring a lot of historical, like you kind of blend those two
I
those
love
two
historical
elements.
fiction as well. Yeah, so I love a
Yeah.
medieval setting. I don't know why.
And so do you do a lot of research for that? I mean, it's why I
I
write
have.
pure, like, fantasy worlds that don't have a lot of historical influence for myself. But I love, love, love that you do that research. And so what kind of research would you do? And how true to the historical setting do you stay, versus where do you give yourself some leeway and don't worry too much about the accuracy? What's
Yeah,
your
so
take on that?
I'm like you. I absolutely love historical fiction, and I studied it as well. So medieval history there's that period for me, the sort of anywhere. Well, to be honest, anywhere from like ancient Greece up to like maybe like the 1300s, before cannons really. Things started getting a bit grim after cannons.
Yeah.
So, well, it was grim before then anyway, people cutting each other's heads off and whatnot. But I just like that sort of, because for me, it just felt like, it probably wasn't, but it felt like, or feels like that, like was a bit of a battle, more of a battle than it is now. We've got a lot
It's
of
almost a metaphor,
it's,
right? Like life was worth something different, or just a very different experience then.
yeah. So I just feel like there's already a layer of conflict there that you've got, and it's interesting to sort of add layers to it then, with like magic and like the different aspects of world building. Like I've seen one person write a story where it was entirely like a world infested with fungi.
So we were just talking about historical, and how have you ever written a contemporary novel or a novel without magic in it, even if it was historical?
I've not done a novel, but I do like short stories and stuff like that. So actually wrote a magical realism short story this year, got published this year, and that was about the war in Gaza.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was it's called Hiding from Dragons, and it's about two brothers, two young boys trying to escape the war zone, and the main character is so traumatized that he sees jets as dragons. So because he loves fantasy, so his world has sort of become this horrible fantasy world now. And so that again, this is just whatever is on my mind, what I'm trying to deal with and process. That's what filters through and influences what I write. Like I'm writing another short story or just finishing it off now, editing it. And it's about basically conscription, because there's been a lot of talk in this country and in Europe about people being conscripted into the armies.
Yeah. Which is something that we never thought we'd see in our lifetime. And there's these huge shifts happening, right? Where your mind changes, and it's easy to say in peace times, it's easy to say, oh, like, I don't support that. And then how you get challenged is certainly, I love that you're writing about that. But still, is that book still fantasy? Is there magic in it?
That isn't a fantasy world, that the story, the one about conscription. But yeah, I've written stories like about homelessness in Liverpool, home city. I've written one story also set in Liverpool, but not in long. It's all short stories. Maybe one
Yeah.
day.
Maybe one day. I love that. And I mean, I write a lot of nonfiction as well because I teach writing. I write about writing. It's a little bit meta. But in terms of fiction, it's a challenge for me to not include something. There was a time in 2020 when YA fantasy was slow. There was a bit of a glut and it wasn't selling as well. And, I spoke with my agent and they suggested that I write a contemporary novel. And I did on proposal. I wrote a proposal for a contemporary novel. Called my agent partway through, like maybe chapter 4. And I'm like, okay, here's the thing. I was writing a contemporary novel. Then Phantom pirate ship showed up and I'm just roll with this, trying to write a contemporary novel with no magic in it. And my agent was like, yeah, no, that tracks. Let's go with that. And so we did, but I didn't end up writing the full book, but I might go back to that one because I just love it. But that was sort of where it took me. I tried, and then I was like, no, this is not going to work. And all of a sudden we had magic splashing and exploding all over the page. And that's just, what made it fun for me.
Yeah.
I love your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for doing it. And you get to talk to a lot of writers. And one of the things that I've noticed that you like to talk about with writers is how they grow with each and every story. And so you're talking about writing different genres and writing in different mediums and all of these things, and writing short stories and a novel, and you now have a novella, right? Like all of these different things. Is that part of what's fun for you in writing, is learning and changing and exploring those different lengths of story?
Yeah, I found it really interesting. But the main reason why I sort of pivoted is because I just got really tired of writing novels. It takes too long to edit.
Tell me about it. That's literally my job, is editing novels.
Well, yeah. So it just became a chore. And so I just like, I'll go back to that. And that's when I started Together We Rise. And since then, I've just been working on shorter stuff. And I've enjoyed it a lot more. And like we say, playing with structure, playing with form, that's something that's been interesting me a lot more. So I've written 2 short stories with, I would say, unique structures. One is a fantasy story, and it's basically a weekly to-do list for a goblin chief.
Oh my goodness, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, and it actually links in with another short story, which is like the opposite. It's 8,000 words. But it's sort of, you get like an idea of what's going on by getting these sort of bullet pointed things that you need to do. And sometimes you get a bit of reasoning behind why you've got to do it. So like he's going through like a tough time with his wife being kicked out of the house, and there's some trouble with the few menial problems in there and all.
I wish the listeners could actually see your face. We're recording this and you won't get to see the video, but Richie is absolutely lit up. And you can't tell because he's very chill, but absolutely grinning from ear to ear when he talks about this goblin's to-do list. And it just makes me want to read it, to be honest, because you had fun with it. And I love it. And I see that the short story is written, is it from 8 point of view characters? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's Together We Rise. It's 8 characters. So you could technically call it a short story anthology.
But 8 characters, but are they all point of view characters, or there's just 8 characters in this story?
8 points of view characters, yeah.
Yeah.
So each one's got 1 chapter each. I like to think of it as like a relay race. So each character passes the baton on to the next one. So there's like a bit of overlap. There's a connection. There's like a thread.
There's a thread, right? There's a thread and the story continues. Oh, so challenging. But I mean, you've been writing for a long time. And so when you're listening to this podcast, if you're writing your first novel, we don't need to try every single fancy structure thing, because sometimes as beginning writers, we often will see something that really inspires us. And then we want to tackle these really crazy structures. And I often have to tell writers, hey, don't do it. And for your first book, because you've got a long life of writing ahead of you. I challenge you to just eat. What is it? What is the M&M commercial? Is it M&M's? You can't eat just one, or bet you can't eat just one. I don't know. It's some commercial. But the same thing with novels or books. You're going to have a chance. And your first book, you're often working on so many other things that creating a complex structure, you're making things harder for yourself. And to be honest, I mean, unless your book is a thriller or suspense novel where the structure is kind of part of it, you don't need it necessarily to write a great book. So the payoff isn't there for all the extra work. But for those of us who are career writers or addicted forever to writing, changing that up, it does keep it fresh, right? Writing in different formats or writing in different structures or playing with it. I've never written something with 8 point of view characters, right? Like something like that, as you get more and more advanced, can create more interest so that you don't get bored when you've kind of mastered the basics. Is that why you do that?
Yeah.
Challenge yourself?
Yeah, I like to be challenged. Yeah, I completely agree with what you say there. Because I was saying it to someone on another podcast, and it was like when I started writing, I was like, I'm gonna write three book fantasy series. It's gonna be the greatest fantasy story ever told.
You
And
want
then
to
like,
write the most epic thing to start,
yeah,
right?
but so many people do that. They go, I'm gonna write a 10 book series, and I just think now, don't do that, yourself. Just
You're
start
making it way
with sort of
harder on yourself.
yeah, just
See
start
how
with
it
something.
goes.
Write a few short stories, find your feet, get used to telling complete stories, and then scale up your project and learn. Focus on learning, practicing skills like dialogue. So like I've got a bit of a course that I've not yet done, but I've started doing with the library system in Liverpool, which is 10 parts or so. And each one you just focus on a specific thing, and then you use the skills that you've learned there to write a short story, which is quite specific. So if it was like dialogue, you would write a conversation-based short story, and you'd have to sort of get your characterization in the plot and conflict and resolution, and as well as doing it through dialogue. It's the only way you can learn, isn't it?
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
you need to get the
Right.
basics down. And Together We Rise is set in your ever expanding world, Turbia. Am I saying that right? Turbia?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm not saying it with the Liverpool accent, so let's hear you say it.
Yeah.
That's how you say it correctly. But tell us, what is that world like?
So the best way I like to explain it is that I love the reason I'm drawn to fantasy is this philosophical debate between good and evil. What is good? What is evil? What is the very nature of it? Philosophy is like a big part of me reading, and it filters through a lot into the writing. In this world, I'm trying to explain the nature of good and evil, and I see it in this world as life versus nothingness. They're the two opposing forces, and in a sort of bid to make it as hard as possible to be destroyed by the nothingness, life is sort of split and created and sort of spread across the universe. So this battle between good and evil is waged on every layer of life. So humans, insects, fish, whatever. Because sometimes you see animals doing mad things. It's like you'll see a lion ravage a bloody wildebeest or something, and then the next second of the video you'll see like a wolf and a bear just roaming around together and a couple of mates, and it's like there's something going on there we can't quite explain. And this is in my fantasy world anyway. This is a way of trying to explain the sort of the nature of good and evil. And in this particular story, the main bad guys, this group, I call it the Kyra. They're trying to bring about a more demonic life to Tavia. So their task, the reason for existing, is to open demon portals, and they're constantly trying to find ways to do that. And then trying to stop them are the good guys. They call them magpies, and their sort of job is to maintain balance and order in the world. And it's a bit of a shadow war that goes on between them, but every now and then it spills out into the wider world. And in this particular story, the Kyra have sort of seized control of the city of Hietalos, where the story is set, and they created this awful capitalist system, evil at its core. The people of Odino, and one of the people involved in the story, Hill, she's lived in the city her whole life, and she's ended up getting married to quite an abusive person, and he is a captain in the police force, the city guard.
So he's got a position of power, but he's using it for evil.
The police are just another gang in this.
They're another gang. Okay, good,
Yeah.
interesting perspective in your world. You can do whatever you like.
Exactly, yeah. So it's pretty grim, but still fed up. And she ends up, long story short, she leads this revolution. And the story is the day of the revolution. So that's all backstory that you don't get in.
Yeah, exactly. And backstory, it's funny because that's where many fantasy writers start. And I like to say you need it as the writer, but that probably isn't all in the book, right? So if you read the novella, you're not going to get all of that you just heard from Richie. You got to kind of figure it out as along the way, as you should. And so you talk about it ever expanding, the sort of, as it's expanding, this is what we need to do to keep it fresh. Was this something that you planned at the beginning, your magic system, or that world building? Did you know where it was going, or is it adding to itself? Are you finding you kind of reach a limit of exploration and then you have to invent a new corner of the world, or how is it expanding?
Well, I've always sort of focused on this era in the work to sort of this period of time, I suppose, where these two forces that I mentioned, they've been waging war and going at each other for hundreds of years. And the balance is now starting to take in the bad guys. They've just discovered, as we learn and together we rise, magic again. Magic does exist in the world, but it's been like anyone who knows anything about it is being like long killed off. And there's very few sort of relics left of it. Like there's a few enchanted weapons, so people know that magic is the thing.
Do they
Using
call it
anything.
do they call it magic, like the actual word magic, or do they have a different word for it?
I call it Magia, Magia. Just a little spin. Don't want to be.
I love just pointing out little tricks for the listeners, because it's one of
Yeah.
the things, in your world. Yes, we talk about magic systems, but if your characters are always calling it magic, I like to use the example. If I was somebody from the 1920s coming into a classroom today and seeing all the kids on their phones talking to people on video, I might think that was magic, right? But now it's just an iPhone or a phone, right? Or a FaceTime or whatever. We know the names of it. And so, yeah, I love that you called it something different to make it unique to your world, because it can be really tiring. And I've done this before. Sent a manuscript in and my agent says, Susie, you have like the word magic 257 times. Well, let's change it up, right? So yeah, it's one of the things. I mean, we can't dive into everything today. I wish we could, but it's one of the things that you can do to make your world feel really special. And you also use the what twigged it was, you said enchanted, right? So you're not saying they're magic weapons, they're enchanted weapons. And we're kind of mixing that up and putting a little bit more meaning around it, because it can be really boring to just call it magic.
Yeah,
Awesome. So how is it, what else are you adding to it, and where are you going with this world? Will it feature in future stories, or are you done with it?
definitely. Yeah. So basically, Together We Rise is the beginning of the great battle, or the stage of where the Dakara are starting to take hold. And I've written a novel, which is the one I abandoned at it, which I will go back to. But that is the next part of the story. And the Dakara have tried something else. It's ended in this really destructive war between humans who live in this remote part of, and they've been sort of battling these huge sort of troll-like who descended from the mountains and just laid waste to everyone. So that's more of like a sort of a well-worded, gritty migrant story, but it's about a young mother, a widowed mother, trying to escape as she's got to cross the war-torn country to get to the border. And that, again, very much inspired by what's been going on in the world and horrendous attitude toward miners. You
I
don't
love
appreciate
that.
the stories and the things that and the length that people have to go to just to survive. And then you get sort of this cold and callous attitude.
And we think about it as history, but it's happening today in our world, right? Like there are many war-torn countries and many displaced people. Okay, let's go back to this abandoned novel for a minute. And I just wanted to say, let's just normalize this, because, there's not, and you're going to go back to it. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. I don't know. But it does happen as writers. And I think, what we talk about as writer's block or something is what we think that is Richie sitting there going, I can't finish this novel, and banging his head on the table or something. But realistically, there's lots of reasons why writers can change course. And you had mentioned it was just becoming overwhelming and you wanted to get something accomplished, right? Like, so you switched to the novella. What's going to allow you to go back to it? Did writing that novella kind of crystallize that world in your mind, and now you're excited to go back to the novel, or what do you need to get back there? What do you think?
I just needed a break from the sort of the drain of editing. And I worked with a professional editor on it, and I got all in really. But I'm near the end, 200 pages in, out of like 300. So I will go back to it. But at the time, it was just, I couldn't do it. I just lost interest. And it probably partly because of what the things going on in the world. And I can't be writing about
Yeah.
I couldn't have felt
Something
like
about
that.
orcs, did you say?
No, I said I don't really feel like it's worthwhile writing about orcs at this particular moment in time. But
We need it more than ever. We need it more than ever. But I get it. And the test, I've abandoned novels before as well. And I may go back to them or I may not. And one of the tests that I like to talk about with people who walk away is, hey, if you put it aside and you're okay and you don't miss it, maybe it's not the right time. Like you said, we're always writing a specific book at a specific moment in time for a reason, and we change as people. I have a book that was on submission 5 years ago now, in the time when I mentioned earlier when YA was kind of in a bit of a slump, YA fantasy in terms of publishing. And now I think about going back to it. I'm a different person. I want to write about different things, and I might take it and figure out how to make it make it more what I want to say today. And the industry has changed and trends have changed. Yes, and readership changed, but I've changed as a human. And the work that I want to put out there at a particular moment in time changes as well. So I don't know if that book, it certainly won't be in that form.
yeah, that's it. I think it's what is a really important point that you make, because sometimes I think people get stuck. They're like, I'm going to write in it, fantasy, and then they sort of box themselves in. But you should always have the freedom to do what you want. Like you said, if you're not hearing it or you change, your interests have changed, then don't be afraid to change. Allow your stories to change,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and keep revisiting that, because if you put it away and you're okay leaving it, maybe leave it. And if you put it away and you can't stop thinking about it, you're writing all these novellas and short stories in that world still, and you can't stop thinking, oh my gosh, I just need to finish that novel and I can't wait to get back to it, then that's a totally different feeling. Then you definitely need to finish it and we'll be cheering you on. But there's nothing wrong with stepping away from a project and letting it go, even if it means 200 pages, right? Everything that you learn by doing that will end up somewhere else. All that learning, right? Okay. We've come to the quick fire portion of my podcast. So we've got some couple quick questions for you that I ask as many writers as I can, because I think they're really important for people to hear. And we try to do the behind the scenes. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. How long did it take you to finish your first full length book?
Yeah, 2.5 years.
2.5 years from the time that you thought, I'm going to write a book and here's what it's going to be about, to the time that you either stopped writing it or press publish.
Yeah, I started planning it, and then it went to publisher, and it was part time. So I imagine that I could do it faster for full time.
You can always do, no, 2.5 years is actually pretty fast. I always love it when people come up with 11 years or something. Because we think there's this misconception that most writers write quickly. And certainly we write books 2, 3, 4, 5. We write much more quickly in general. I mean, I'm not the fastest planet. So, and I edit 50 to 100 books a year right now. So at some piece of them, not the entire manuscript, obviously. So I give myself some grace that I'm not the fastest writer. But yeah, it's a long time. It's a long time, because you've got to kind of, and the biggest misconception I had was when I quit my corporate job to do things writing all full time, that I would all of a sudden be able to sit down and write and replicate my best days ever, which were like 10,000 words, when I was sitting down once a month, because that's all I had. But sitting down every day, there's all that thinking and marinating time, and you got to sort of form it, and you can't just sit down and keep pounding because there's nothing there. Yeah. I'd like to say too that when you write your next books, you do get faster, but not, I mean, yeah, you learn things and you know things, but you spend a lot less time wallowing in the, am I doing this right? Do I really have to do all that editing? Is it really going to make it better? Will anybody? So all that stuff, once you've done it once, you kind of let all that baggage go and you spend much less time like spinning. Makes it
I think
faster.
you get to refine your own process a bit more, learn how you work, and then it doesn't, like, you can sort of map it out. So like, I was to say now, if I was planning a short story, I'd be like, all right, I'm gonna need around 3,000 or 4,000 words to tell the story. If I do this, I could probably draft it in 3 or 4 days, like that kind of thing, because you know how you work, and then you can easily plan it out. Yeah, it's just experience.
Absolutely. And I wish I could bottle that and feed it to new writers. But you can't, because you got to figure out how you like to work. And that's the whole point.
Part of the
All
gym.
right. What was your first big break where you were like, what was the moment when you're like, all right, I'm a real writer. This is happening.
I think it was when I first got a short story published. It was by a place called the Premium magazine, and it was a short story, a fantasy short story. But again, there wasn't really much of a fantasy element in it. But that was about the grandmother and having dementia,
Wow.
and yeah, that. Again, I really like that story. The first one I ever wrote, probably not the best, but I always remember like getting an email like midnight when I was going to bed. And I was like, oh, unbelievable, really, because it felt like, yeah, someone's read something and thought, yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
So that
it's
was
an
the
amazing feeling.
that's the first sort of bit of validation that you get.
It's a
Really.
hard feeling to describe to non-writing friends. I assume you have non-writing friends in your life as
Yeah.
well. And just tell them what that feels like to get that letter of acceptance or that public, that notification that they want to publish your story is like, because it doesn't happen for everyone. And I love, I have the most supportive family and husband planet. I'm very lucky, but sometimes it's hard because, when my first book got published, when I landed my agent, when all those big milestones happened, and he's like, "Good job, honey." He doesn't really understand. He's like, "Well, didn't you say you were going to do it? And then you went and did it." Like, he just thinks I can do walk on water, which I wish I could, but he thinks I walk on water, which I love. But yeah, it's not guaranteed that other people will ever understand our writing. So you did something great there. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. What's your best fantasy writing advice for those wanting to work in the genre? And then I'm going to ask you for generic or general advice in a second.
So I think the best place to start is with the world. You need to have an idea of your setting. And so one of the best ways to begin with that process is just to ask what if. What if, I don't know, there was no more oceans or something like that, like a world without, there's just like a few lakes, like something like that. You start beginning to wonder then, well, what kind of people would live in this world? What kind of conflicts would there be in their life? And then all of a sudden you start add layer and layer and layer, and it all begins with a simple what if and just following different trails. And one of the main things is to not settle on the first idea. So you may go down one path in the question, but go back, ask it again and see where it takes you. And then see how many different ideas you can come up with and really sort of interrogate things before you settle on an idea so that you know you're picking the right direction and the one that you're happy with. So that's what I would say.
I love that. That's super helpful advice. I'm going to add to that because they're going to go away and write this world building exercise, the what if. And I just want to remind our listeners that is not chapter 1. You are not going to put that 3 pages that you write as your opening to your book. It does not count. It's brainstorming separately. But yes, thinking about that world and making decisions, because I find, especially as an editor, and I know that you edit as well, but as an editor, I can tell if you haven't made a decision or you thought, oh, I'll decide that later, and I read something about it, it's going to feel so generic and bland. I'm like, you haven't decided yet how this magic works, right? Like, you don't know. So make those decisions, because even if you make a decision and it turns out to not work later or you want to change it, you won't end up with these bland passages, which are placeholders for when you decide.
Yeah.
Yeah, do Richie's thing. Go explore it. And what's your best general advice, fantasy or not, for writers that are just starting out?
I would say the new writers try to capture the enthusiasm as much as possible and preserve it for as long as you can. There's a lot of things that will derail you, or try to derail you. Imposter syndrome will probably kick in at some point, and then you'll start to question whether you can do it. And tied to that, I'd say, is keep your targets when you're starting out nice and easy. Don't put too much pressure on yourself, because if you start committing yourself to 200,000 word novels, then you are going to run into a lot of problems, because it's going to take a long time to write. The doubt is going to creep in. You're probably going to give up. So I think that's why short stories are good, because you can finish off nice projects. You can start sending them out, and if you with a bit of luck, you might get some published, and then that'll just set you on like a completely different path. It'll give you more confidence going into like a bigger project, like a novel. And
And you'll
you've got
often
more.
get feedback during that process as well that might help you with
Exactly,
your
yeah.
larger projects. So amazing advice. Thank you so much, Richie. Where can we find you, your podcast, your books, your novel, your novella, your short stories? Where can we find everything?
The best place to go is richiebilling.com. Links for everything on there. You can also get everything on Patreon. Just search Richie Billing. There's not many Richie Billings, especially fantasy writers, so I'm not that hard to find. And so you can Patreon is the best place, and then the Fantasy Writers Toolshed is the podcast. And they also have a book on writing fantasy called A Fantasy Writer's Handbook, which has been on for 2
Amazing.
years. So yeah, you can check that out.
Thank you so much for sharing all these resources, for talking fantasy with me today. It's been amazing to have you on the podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been lovely chatting with you.
Thanks for tuning in to Show Don't Tell Writing with me, Susie Vidori. Help me continue to bring you the straight goods for that book you're writing or planning to write. Please consider subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening. Also visit susievidori.com/newsletter to hop on my weekly inspired writing newsletter list, where you'll stay inspired and be the first to know about upcoming training, events, and writing courses that happen in my community. If you're feeling brave, check the show notes and send us a page of your writing that isn't quite where you want it to be yet for our Show Don't Tell page review episodes. Remember, that book and your writing is going to open doors that you haven't even thought of yet, and I can't wait to help you make it the absolute best. If you're feeling called to write that book, keep going, and I'm going to be right here cheering you on. See you again next week.